Welcome, KamalaDevi. You are our host today. You are the lead faculty on International School of Temple Arts. You're an author of 7 books. In my own opinion, incredible shaman and incredible facilitator. You also had been participating in the polyamory married and dating reality show, 2 seasons, correct? Which is
That's
super
right.
exciting. And you're a sex and relationship coach for 2 decades.
Yes.
And I'm really looking forward to what you will be sharing today.
Such a pleasure, Ria. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be part of a festival that has such a big vision. And I'm remembering when I first met actually you and your partner, when James told me that he was integral informed, and we started having this really sapiosexual connection, and we started talking about the various stages of consciousness and how it related to tantra and relationship. And that was, gosh, it's really been a handful of years ago. I can't remember, but it's been some time. And to see this festival come to fruition is just such a gift to the world. Thank you. So today, based on the initial seeds of that conversation, I thought I would really spontaneously transmit some of the distinctions that inform, like, if we're going to do integral theory in life or as our individual philosophy, how then does that inform and affect our relationships, and what's an upgrade, like a lens, like looking through the integral lens can really upgrade the way that we actually both assess, how we're showing up, who's the appropriate partner, so, to select and to dance with, as well as when breakdowns happen, how do we get through it in a faster way because we have a bigger picture. So some hopefully, geekery about analyzing relationships from this lens, but then practical tools and tips in this time together. So, a little background, I will say, on me, because I'm known as not just a sex and relationship, coach who's seen alternative relationships. I'm personally gender transcendent and poly and kinky and queer, and all of the categories, the various categories of relating are alternative or even post-conventional. And then one may look at, like, my personal life as well as a lot of my professional life and say, well, is this person anti-convention? Or there's almost a thing like, oh, well, if you're polyamorous, does that mean you're against monogamy? Or do monogamous people feel alienated by that? And one of the most beautiful things about integral theory is it allows us to look at look beyond that higher or lower kind of perspective. So when we talk about evolution, it is often just a matter of a system getting more complex, more and more complex. And it isn't necessarily, it's not that it's higher or lower, it's that the more complex the system is, the more organization, the more order it needs. And it's essential that you have the basic components like mastered in order to get to higher levels. And so to translate this like really easily, like, people will think, oh, if I am first single, like I have to master being single before I can be in relationship, or I have to master being self-love before I can be in a partner, relationship. And it's actually an ongoing iterative process. Like, self-love can't be mastered. we're all works in progress. So we're all working on that to some degree. And then in partnership with one other person, it is more complex than being just in relationship with self. Another person offers back more, stimuli, more triggers, more just opportunity for self-reflection. And then when we add other partners, it then can look like, whoa, now exponentially more, because we've got somebody else plus them, and then how they interact with the whole system. And so a really novice look would say, well, polyamory is then more evolved than monogamy. And that is just a gross simplification. It's not the truth, or one has to be super evolved to be polyamorous. So I want you to know, I want to just upfront admit there are a lot of very immature, unevolved, polyamorous practitioners, just as there are a lot of people doing dysfunctional monogamy that's really immature and unevolved. And I would say probably in equal proportions. And there are also immensely beautiful monogamous commitments that are deeply devoted, that create a container for immense evolution. That relationship choice and that commitment to be sexually exclusive can actually, create the riverbanks for immense, tremendous, enlightened relating. And simultaneously, like, there are also complex, intimate networks of polyamorous families who are extremely evolved. And by evolved, I mean they are mastering both at the level of sovereignty, the individual, and then the level of synergy, like the various relations and the interrelations. And so it's what we begin to start talking about when we're looking at these levels of consciousness in different types of relationships is we're looking at whether someone's, has a conventional understanding, and then, of course, the pre-conventional understanding is when they, for example, and I'll just first lay out, there's pre-conventional, there's conventional, and there's post-conventional. And the post-conventional is really when we start to get into enlightened relating. But at the pre-conventional level, we see the train wrecks and the disasters of relationship where people are like, oh, I'm so sovereign and I'm so in love with myself that I will, I'm my own primary, like in a really immature way, that they don't actually know how to, they're just players. They play with other people's emotions, and they're not actually deeply attuning and relating and doing the depths of what's possible in relationship. And that's pre-conventional. They haven't learned the power of commitment, like what a commitment is, what an agreement is, what it is to actually make a vow and to relate from a place of like, wow, your needs are as important as mine, and I'm considering both. And I'm going to, come from a place of like, how do I value myself equally? And as I value you, as we do in integral theory, where we say there's partial perspectives here. It's not, it's not just my perspective. This is how I see it. It's like, wow, there is another person who has a different perspective that informs mine, that enriches me. And now when we have two perspectives, we're actually more complementary, and we see the world from a broader perspective. And yes, it's true that other perspectives can also enhance that, whether or not you're sleeping with them, but that is when we can really start to do the relationship dance at a conventional level of okay, I'm in agreement, I'm in relationship, I'm learning what a commitment is. So most of the disasters that we see, whether it's monogamous people cheating and not keeping, or whether it's, commitment phobic polyamorous people or non-monogamous people who are afraid to commit, so they say, oh, I'm a free love, and then they create a disaster with a wake of heartbreak behind them. So that's pre-conventional. And then in the convention of relating, which is primarily what, as a sex and relationship coach, I deal with day in, day out. I'm listening to thousands of couples as they're up against the genuine challenge of wow, how do I know myself, be true to that, and honor, that my partner has their needs and their boundaries and their desires, and we're trying to do this dance together. And whether that's one partner or many partners, it doesn't matter. It's a complex interrelation dance. And at the essence of that, there's a whole lot of this, I want to say, interdependence, which is to the degree that you know yourself and you honor yourself, and you can come healthy to a relationship and say, well, I want them to know and honor them. And it's not mutually exclusive. It's not like, our needs, even if they seem really opposite, how do we get the bigger perspective, the more integral perspective of, it's not just my needs or your needs, it's not just our needs, it's a pretty common image now. We have two cups at a wedding, and we pour the two, the sacred elixir of wine perhaps gets poured into a third cup, and the third chalice represents the relationship cup. And so that's the interdependence. It's like there is something, created between us. And with a post-conventional, and more of a transcendent relationship model, what we're moving towards is what is, the marriage of souls, not of personalities. And the convention is, what's a relationship supposed to look like, whether it's marriage or poly or anything else. It's convention is, this is what I've been taught. These are the programs. These are the norm or the expectations. And then when we come to a place where we're in enough congruence, enough knowing of ourselves, knowing of our partner, we can co-create a relationship that looks like the shape of our heart, not like what our parents' relationship looks like or what Hollywood says our relationship should look like. And so that transcendent, ultimate post-conventional relationship has to include the best of what we know and then transcend it. It's not just, okay, down with it entirely, or let's be in reaction to the culture, because maybe your full expression as a lover and your relationship that is your highest ideal actually ends up looking like Hollywood or like your parents. So it's not like we're in reaction, we're actually coming from core. So the distinction I want to point to next is around the difference between personality and soul. And this is something that's very nuanced, and it's something that I can kind of simplify. We tend to know personality as a collective of various, traits that are sometimes coping strategies for various, wounds or lessons that we had during childhood or upbringing. But it's kind of the sum, of our character or our habits or who we are or who we think we are. In other words, I'll use the word personality interchangeable today with identity. It is the sense of like who we think we are. And the personality is very important for our, it's a way of seeing and being in the world. It's a way of interacting in the world in a consistent way. And it's important to help us like cope with the 3D, with the third dimension. Like there's 3-dimensional rules, and the personality can navigate in this 3-dimensional world. And yet, if you're watching this, that you're more than your personality and your identity. That there's like an animating force that is deeper and more core to who you are. And this is where whether you want to call it soul or essence or true self, the quality of the soul is actually more fifth dimensional. And it's the greater non-physical self that's connected, that is in communion with, source energy. And so in all of our lives, I'll do this. Like if we were in a workshop setting right now, there might be people that identify as tantric or as kinky or as queer or as any one of the, identities that I brought up, as monogamous, as parents, as now people will like to kind of gather and clump and have their different identities, right? These are identities. This is how I see the world. This is what I value. This is what I do with my limited life force energy. This is my community. We'll gather in these different groupings. And yet when we look at soul and personality, there's really only two groups. And it's like, oh, are you in, doesn't matter where you're standing in which congregation you're with, you're either standing in your identity, or your soul. And from integral perspective, it's actually not either or, it's both. And we're all personality. All of us has a personality, and all of us has this soul, but to different degrees. And where's your center of gravity? Now I bring this up because we're on this path of evolving our relationships. We're here to say, how can I be in an evolutionary partnership, whether that's with myself, my community, with one lover or more. We want to be the best versions of ourselves. And it's not just, oh, am I being my soul? It's being like, I want to include my personality, my body, mind, and transcend to that fifth dimension. But it's not transcend the body, it's including the body and transcending it. So a lot of the work that we do in Tantra and sacred sexuality is about downloading or even descending, the sort of enlightenment, the endarkenment into matter, into flesh. And it's a really powerful practice that can be very kind of binary unless we're integrally informed. So a lot of people will think, my energy, I'm rising my energy up, I'm transcending, I'm doing these transcendent practices to become more spirit-like, whereas other people who, and we all know them, are really airy-fairy, need to sometimes do the deeper work to get into their body, to get into their emotions, and like they're like, I'm on this descending path. But from an integral perspective, we're really wanting to acknowledge both, that both of those, which is where it's like, that's the non-dual tantric path. That's where non-dual tantra really meets with integral. It's like we want to include the body and transcend the body so that we are experiencing soul as a greater non-physical self, but not just as something we access in dream time when we leave the body, but that we experience in the subatomic level, that we can really learn to awaken and unlock, in the flesh, in the touch, in the movement, in the breath practices that we do. So at this point, I'm just sort of laying some of the philosophy of here's where, integral meets tantra or meets, in this case, it was tantra. And before I was talking a little bit about the relationship style. But ultimately, this soul and personality distinction is one that can get very distorted in the mind, by the ego, to where many people get a spiritual ego or a spiritual identity. And that's my cat, by the way. The spiritual identity is this big danger where it's like, I think, I start to think, or feel the arrogance of, ooh, look at the enlightenment experience. I had a Satori. I had a, we'll have this transcendent experience of soul, and then feel like that's who we are. And that's what we, then that makes us better than, or superior to, and so there's a spiritual arrogance that can come with these, these gem of experiences. So I'd like to point out another teaching from integral theory that's really helpful for this. So when we have an enlightened experience, and this is, whether it could be in sex, and I'll take that because it's fun to use those examples. I genuinely believe when I start talking to people about their sex life, I will ask them if they've had a mystical experience in bed, when you're making love and then all of a sudden you and another merge and you feel like the walls disappear and you don't know who's breathing whom. You don't know where you start and the other person stops. There's just this transcendent like oneness, like like where there's only one person here, which is, a true face of reality. That is a fundamental truth, is that we are one, we are connected. And we will have these transcendent experiences, whether it's in making love or in meditation, it doesn't matter. Maybe it's when you're in the flow of playing tennis, when you're just in the absolute flow and you feel this, and the universe moving through you. Those transcendent experiences are states. So in integral theory, there's a lot of like, okay, well, there's states and there's stages. And this distinction is so often missed in our relational and spiritual vocabulary. So you have this ecstatic state in making love once, and then, or for your first time, or maybe it's your 20th time. But then what will happen is, as the state kind of wears off, maybe you're in the afterglow of making love and you're so blissful, but your partner does something that's irritating again. And you're like, ooh, where did my bliss go? Or maybe it's, if it's a big Satori, it might be 3 weeks later. It might be like, oh, wow, my meditations aren't as shiny, or, you're feeling that it's wearing off. And that's because states actually do wear off. And the best way to think of a state is like, you're hungry, you're tired, you're, maybe your moon is coming, and so you're in the state of PMS. But we know this passes. These are cycles. This is what it means to be human. We go through different states, and you get a fantastic review from, like, I know when my books get like good reviews, I'm like, yeah, I'm in a great state, right? But then it wears off when you look at your bills or whatever it is that will also affect your states. And so in lovemaking, we often, it generates a state. Lovemaking can, biochemically generate a state, but meeting and falling in love with somebody, when they appreciate you, it's like the neurotransmitters light up and you're like, woo, I'm in a state. And the state of love, or NRE, is actually it's like a chemically induced state that lasts sometimes 3 months, sometimes all the way up to 2 years. And then the neurochemistry goes, whoa, I can't sustain that much of a state. So it starts to wear off after 2 years. But that's really different than the stage of love. So in polyamory, we have that term NRE, new relationship energy. It's also often referred to as like honeymoon phase, or twitterpation. There's different terms for it, but so I'm going to use my own personal example of my marriage. Now 20 years, I'm celebrating. This Valentine's will actually be our 20-year anniversary. And we've gone through, in those 20 years, lots of different states of, oh, we're in a really love, high love state, but it's very different than the stages that we've actually seen, which takes more sustainably a longer time. And so if you're making love and you have a state, that's great, but what does it mean to actually cultivate a state of connection, compassion, attunement, love over a longer period of time? And a lot of times people will meet, this is a perfect example, in Burning Man or festivals like this, and they're supported, they're resourced, they're high, they meet and they're like, yes, you're my person, and they get all excited, and it's like, awesome. They come down from the mountaintop, the workshop's over, the conference, it's like, let's stay in touch, whatever it is. And then they start, or maybe even they move in together and try to start to make life together, and they realize, whoa, that was a fun state we were in, but we're in really different stages of life. Like, to actually live together is not quite the match. Like, not just the compatibility of day in, day out or values. It's more like, how come you're not like that amazing? How come we're not having sex like we did when we were on vacation? Like, where did that go? It's not necessarily sustainable. So my work has been, for many years now, couples or families will come to me and they'll say, I'll often ask, like, why are you hiring me? And they'll say, we want to go back to our honeymoon. We want to re-experience that new love energy. And, they hire a relationship coach or they want to get their sex back to that state. And it's like, it's not quite the right frame to go backwards. It's like, well, what if we develop a deeper intimacy and a knowing of the true self and come into a love of who you are, as opposed to the exotic fascination with the possibility and the fantasy of who we think you are. And of course, people hire me because they think they want that, but what they really truly want, and the only genuine satisfaction that is sustainable, comes from the kind of love that comes from soul to soul. And so that transition from, okay, this is my personality's in relationship with another personality, and there's lots of states and ups and downs. It's like, how do we actually evolve into relationships where our essences are in deep communion? So I'm going to speak into that, but I do want to give one more metaphor. All right. So I have a 14-year-old son, and when somebody asks me, oh, I want to be back in the honeymoon phase, I want to make love all night, or, be so irresistibly attracted to my partner that I can't keep my hands off of them, just like we did on our second date. When they want that, I use the example of my 14-year-old son. I say, when my baby was just like nursing, and like I was looking into their eyes, I was so in love with this little darling little baby, and it was like this whole biochemical thing. I was just like, oh my God, I die for this. It's so beautiful. And I thought I loved this baby, but really biochemically it's a state of a new relationship. Like, I didn't know that baby. I didn't know their personality. I didn't know their essence and their soul. Yes, we had the soul contract. Yes, I'm their doorway to life. But to ask to go back when you've been married for 10 years and say, I want to be like I was on my second date, is like saying that I want my 14-year-old to be back in my arms. I want him to be tiny again. Like, it's kind of ridiculous. It's like, no, you actually want to know who your teenager is now and see who, like, they're a miracle that's unfolding, that's a whole new person. And don't you want to like be present for that experience, as opposed to just pushing them back into diapers? And that's really what it is when we're in relationship and the NRE wears off. It's like, okay, so that was fun, that was a wild ride, and who is this human? What are their deep desires, and what's their worldview, and what is their soul calling them to do, and how can we support them in that? Now, when it comes to this kind of love, the deep, abiding soul love, the biggest distinction between personality and soul love is that the personality wants and needs because it wants to preserve its identity in order to be congruent. And that's the strongest force. One of the strongest forces on the planet is to want to be um, who, who we think we are, want to be congruent or have homeostasis. Like if we say, and I even tell people this when I'm like writing my books. So, just for example, like when I announced I was writing Sex Shamans, this book, I put it out into the public before the book was finished as a way to know, oh, my identity now is like, I'm going to edit this really important book. Now, if I don't do it, I'll be incongruent and it'll feel really uncomfortable. And I was using my ego, which is, look, I'm editing this book as a way to get me to, catch up, because I really know that we want to be congruent with who we say we are. And so if we perceive our partners as, I need you to be that way in order for me to be this way. If they're a source of needs for us, I need you to be, whether it's rich or healthy or handsome, if you're those things, then my identity can rest on that. Then it's an identity love, needing someone. And it feels good to need to be needed. When a partner needs you, it's like, oh, that feels good. I feel like the ego gets stroked by being needed, but it's kind of a pseudo pleasure because it's nowhere near the depths of feeling good as it does when you're loved. I mean, think about it. Like, would you rather be needed or would you rather be loved? And the ego needs. And then ego's like, I love you, thank you. You gave me this gift or this orgasm or this, whatever it is, the ego will reward that thing that meets my needs, as opposed to I love you for you. The soul doesn't want. So another way of saying it is like the personality actually doesn't love. The personality needs. That's a quote from Byron Katie. The soul wants for. So that instead of becoming really transactional, like I'll give you my love if you give me this, and we're, maintaining this kind of facade together, or, we're scratching each other's back, and that's what our relationship's based on. The soul is like, I want to see you shine. When I love someone from my soul, it's because I see their soul shine and I want them to be the best version of themselves. And whether I'm a part of it or not, I'm happy for them. I want for them. And a soul relationship, they want for me as well. My husband, like when I was writing books, like when I'm writing books, it takes immense amounts of dedication and time away from the partnership. Like, he'll ask me to go on a trip or do this. And I'm like, look, I've got to write. I've got a deadline. I've got this. And he genuinely, instead of resenting my writing or he's like, okay, this is a soul calling. So let's give space and provide and support and bring lunches or drinks, smoothies, so that I can devote myself to my soul calling, because that's a gift. He's not doing that in order to get something. It's a tiny example, but we want to self-assess and say, well, what is it that my partner is called to do that doesn't just benefit me, but it benefits their full expression? And when I drop into the depths of my heart, that place where we're connected and my heart wants for them, then their win is my win. So we know we're in soul love when whatever they're celebrating, because their happiness is our happiness. Now, I think we all have like a sense of that. Now, the trap and the challenge is that when we start thinking dualistically, there's personality love and there's soul love. And, oh, this is good and that's bad. like then, or I'm so spiritual and in this soul love, and look at how unevolved this is. Then we get the spiritual ego, which is this other level that I mentioned. We want to actually include the personality and the identity and then transcend it. Because if we don't, and I can tell you this firsthand, if we try too hard to be too spiritual or too generous, wanting for our partners despite what our own personal needs are, then we can fracture. And that fracture can be like a psychotic break. It's a very dangerous territory to actually divorce yourself from, whether it's your personality that has its own coping needs, or your, even worse, your nervous system. Like, so the inside of the body, the nervous system is an alarm that says, hey, you're in danger. If you get very nervous or anxious, it's an alarm system saying, hey, be careful, because trauma is either from the past or in the future. It's like about to happen. And if you don't listen to that, then you can have this traumatic response. And that fracture can be devastating to not just one's, like I said, their nervous system and their mental state, but it can just really sabotage, the relationship, your sense of self, and your progress as an evolutionary being. Like, you're trying to grow, and we're all trying to grow, and this motivation to evolve faster than we can actually hurt us. A great metaphor is when we want to work out. All right, so we're going to the gym, and maybe you're working with weights, and you're like, okay, if I want to lift 150 pounds, then I'm going to have to, start with 25, 50, like smaller reps over time until I work up to it. However, if you're like, I want to be at 150 pounds, and you go in there and you push, bench press, you can rip your muscles. You can literally, injure your ligaments. And that is devastating. And we do this in relationships all the time. People come to me with relationship injuries because they were trying to push to try something bigger than they were capable of bearing. It was like they were over generous with their partner, or, okay, yeah, let you go do your dharma, go cross country, and I'll be fine. Our relationship will survive, when that person really wasn't ready for that kind of a thing. And maybe it's not even by their own generosity. Maybe their partner said, oh, I'm going to take on a new relationship or a new job or something, and didn't consider their nervous system, their capacity, wasn't making decisions with them. And those non-unilateral decisions could actually fracture the relationship, but then the individual who's like, I want to be happy for you, but I'm really not there yet because my needs weren't met, heard, understood, considered, whatever it is. Like, this is, of course, a general example of something that I see so many times with different specifics. But the essence is, when we're looking through a more integrated lens, then we say, okay, yes, we are evolving together towards this soul connection, but the personality is also very precious and important. And the personality and its wounding and its insecurities and its limitations have all helped you cope and get to where you are. And we want to embrace that, and we want to grow with the pace that you're ready for in relationship. And so, hopefully this helps, with the kind of a both and, that we are both personality and soul, and are evolution may be that we're wanting to more and more let go of, our past wounding or our old coping strategies. And the question you might have is, well, how do I do that? Where do I go to to in a sustainable, healthy way evolve these insecurities or these challenges, whether you're trying to open a relationship or you're just trying to want for your beloved or want a true relationship that's not in constant chaos or drama, which, by the way, I had the experience, I'll just share that I was very addicted to drama for a long time. And it's funny to say that, when you read people talk about relationships, they're like, oh, I don't do drama, I don't want drama. Usually it's the people who say that you look under the hood and you're like, what's going on here? What is drama? It is unnecessary suffering. It's it's like when you're saying one thing and you're doing another, and it's kind of chaos in relationship. And I was addicted to it from a place of a tantric paradigm of ooh, it's passionate and emotional, and this is the way that romance looks. And because we don't even realize how much drama we get fed to us on the love songs that we listen to on the radio or the rom-coms that we watch on the TV. But there was an immense addiction to it that when I thought about having an enlightened relationship, one from soul, I actually thought, oh, that sounds boring. That idea that we could be really content and want for our partners and not be triggered and not be challenged. And that just sounds like yawn. And what's amazing is that it, really took, for me, in my case, that fracture I mentioned, it took a deep crash in my nervous system where I was just like, oh my God, for me to finally want to get off the roller coaster that I constantly was, because the personality was clinging and wanting and needing and having problems and always, challenged. And then when I fractured, when I really hit that rock bottom, and my partner, my beloved, and I nearly divorced, that was the moment, the dark night of the soul, when I was able to say, all right, I'm willing to leave this relationship. It was only when I said, I don't need him anymore. I don't need this fucking drama. I don't need it. It was only that moment of letting go and non-attachment that my soul could come through. Because my soul, when I was looking at staying with my mother and how am I going to handle the divorcing, my son going to stay with, my soul came through. And regardless of all the story, the mind, the unmet needs, my soul was like, you may not need him, but you want him. And more than that, you want for, my best version of who I am. He brings that out in me and I bring that out in him. And that's what I wanted. And so it kind of took a death of the relationship in order for us to transcend to this place where at first it was all about building the soul relationship, but now it's about building the soul and the personality relationship. Okay, well, what are the needs that we do meet for each other? But what are the values that we share that are higher than those needs? And how can we want for each other? And then also treat our own personality needs as equally important. So I really hope that you don't have to go through a devastating relational crash, but I do invite you into a conversation around, what does the best version of me look like, in life and then in relationship. And, if my husband were here, he would say that the answer to all of his relationship problems was always about getting into a beautiful state and being in, in his soul first. Like if he's like, ooh, I'm angry or resentful or triggered. He's like, that's not my soul. Let me get into this soulful place where I'm appreciating life. And then when he looks through those eyes, he'd be like, well, what do you need? How can I address your personality? Like, then it's that part of us that's bigger than the little broken, wounded part that can actually not push the wounded part out and try to kick it out, but instead try to nurture it and love it through. So one of the tips, I'll start to move towards some tips and tools of how to apply this. And one is to increase your vocabulary and to be able to, in your relating, to know yourself, know your personality, know your soul. And, to know the soul is a deep life study, to be in the direct knowing of who you are, but to continue to pursue knowing both. So personal growth is all in the area of like knowing your personality, whether it's therapy or, like I said, doing the identity work, but which is very important, but it's different than the, deep meeting yourself in meditation and all the transcendent practices where you will come to know that the soul is the center of, your North Star, and to allow you that to guide you and to reorient your life around the soul. And then when you do that and your partner does that to their degree, right? Because we can only do our work. Then we take the relationship, that third cup, that third chalice, and we say, how do we reorient this towards the soul relationship? And as we're shooting for the star, going towards that intention, we're only traveling as fast as we can include all parts of ourselves, as opposed to fracturing and jettisoning old parts of ourselves. We instead want to really embrace that, because that's what integral means. Integration is wholeness. And so we're wanting to include the wounded, broken, scared parts, and then transcend them with the love that we are and the source energy that we're connected to. And little tip is when you are in your wounding or breakdown or hurt, or when the personality has hijacked your ability to see the soul, like those are the moments when you want to not make decisions, don't let that guide you. You say, okay, this is a state. My personality is just a state, but I'm moving towards a stage in which my soul is my guiding force. And the way to actually turn a state like into a stage is to practice it enough that it becomes your reality. So what we want to be practicing are these soulful states so much that that's your everyday, like living and breathing. So I'll leave you with a metaphor, and it's how clothing gets in India. There was this whole reclamation of homespun cotton, and how cotton got turned into the color indigo, how it got dyed. So I want to think of this white cotton, kind of like the 3D body that we inhabit. Like this is our costume, our personality, and it gets dipped into the indigo dye and then hung out to dry in the sun, and the sun bleaches it out. So it's like a beautiful, deep, rich indigo, but when it dries out, it turns like baby blue. And then they dip it again, and then it turns like a darker blue, and they hang it out and the sun bleaches and it lightens up. And then they dip it again and it gets darker and darker. And eventually when it's hanging out under the fierce, like blessing of the sun, the indigo stays because it's woven into the fabric of your being. And we want to keep dipping ourselves into soul, into meditation, into transcendental lovemaking, into these ecstatic practices like this evolutionary festival. And the more that we dip ourselves into this and drink of this source energy, the more it becomes a stage. So it's no longer just a little, state. It's like now this indigo cloth is forever that color. And that's what I want for you. Well, it's been a pleasure. And Yeah, thank you for connecting with me today. I'd love to continue to connect if you resonate with what I've shared and are interested. I mentioned I have a lot of books and resources. Most personally, I have an invitation for any healers or teachers or mentors themselves, because that's my juice right now, is working with high-level teachers. I'd love to do some private mentorship with you. But the way to continue to work with me, or just to stay in touch, would be to go to my website, KamalaDevi.com. And I have a whole page of free gifts and videos. And so get on my website and I'll send you all kinds of free tools. Thank you so much. Enjoy the festival.
Thank you, KamalaDevi.